part of the Another Realm Media Network. Welcome back, everybody, to another fantastic episode of Mysterial Experiences. I've got a great episode for you today. We've got Louis, Borges, and Marquise Williams from the Quantum Ladder podcast. And we get into a lot of great conversation. And right around the hour mark, we start getting into some more, let's call it non-mysterial conversation. It's a great conversation, really thinking about what all this kind of stuff means to us as people, to society, etc. So I encourage you to stick around. But this episode is almost 2 hours long, and so because of that, we don't have the coming up intro in the beginning. Right after the kind of intro for the podcast plays, we get right into the conversation with Marquise and Louis. So please make sure you stick around for the entire show, and love to know what your thought is on this longer form podcast episode. Thanks so much for watching. As a reminder, if you have an experience that you'd like to share with me or have me share with others on the air, you can email me at Josh Rutledge, it's Rutledge at mysterialexperiences.com. I'd love to hear about your experience, and I'd love to share it with our audience if you feel so inclined. So thank you, and let's go ahead and get into the conversation. Welcome to this episode of Mysterial Experiences, where we delve into the heart of mystery and the ethereal. Today we invite you on a voyage through shadowed realms of the unexplained. From spectral whispers to cosmic enigmas. Join us as we explore tales and phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, in a quest to uncover truths hidden in the fabric of the extraordinary. Prepare for a journey into the unknown, where each revelation is a step closer to unraveling the mysterial. Welcome back, everybody, to another fantastic episode of Mysterial Experiences. We have two amazing guests for you today, and that is Louis Borges and...
Yeah.
Sorry, I said it wrong.
Yeah, Borges.
Borges. It's the soft G.
There you go.
It's not GIF, it's Jeff. And Marquis, and I'm probably saying that wrong, too.
No, it's close. Marquise. You do pronounce the S when there's an E at the end.
Okay, Marquise
Williams.
Williams. I could have gotten that one wrong too.
That's
you never
right.
know.
They never.
I always try to make it a point to ask how to pronounce the names before the show gets started, and I totally forgot this time around. So you'll have to excuse me.
No problem.
So, anyways, you guys are doing a fantastic podcast. You do it it's live. It's on YouTube. It's also, I think, on the OnX network, which very familiar with them, and it's called the Quantum Ladder podcast, which is just a fantastic name. And you all get into all kinds of topics, primarily, I think, in the scientific fields. But I don't know if one of you want to go first and kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you got going on.
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah, thanks for the invite, Josh. Again, I'm Louis Borges. Prior to doing this project, both Marquise and myself were hosting UAP-related shows, but we got, a myriad of interest. UAPs and aliens and, deep dives and that type of topic was just one of the many things that we were fascinated by, and we were consuming all this additional content and doing all these side conversations. And I thought, well, this is a show. There's a lot of people that are science-minded who are also into the UAP phenomenon. And I thought, what better way to do that than to basically do what you do, right? Just chat for an hour, 2 hours, and whatever comes up, comes up. And it slowly morphed into more of a visual and imagery-based show. So any given episode, we'll take a very complicated topic and then do our best to break it down so that if you know nothing about it, you can watch the episode. The info doesn't go over your head. There's lots of imagery and things to kind of explain what we're trying to say in a much better and easier way. And by the end of it, you wind up, even people that know a lot about the topics we're covering will take away something new and fresh. And it's a lot of work on our part. I mean, it was way easier when we were just doing alien shows. You show up and chat and you're done. But this is a week or two minimum of heavy research. Some of these topics we've been personally researching for years. You know, we've had the likes of Lawrence Krauss, who's one of the most famous physicists on the planet, Avi Loeb, even guys in the world of consciousness like Nick Cook. So it's kind of a strange mix. Most science shows are strictly science.
Right.
Most UFO shows don't talk science. So we kind of blend the two and, you know, do it in a different way. A lot of long form conversations don't have any imagery. It's just, you know, conversation. So we try to take a long form show and break it down, use as many video clips and things to really shed light on it. And people have been loving it and we've been enjoying it. So we're commercial free as well. We haven't monetized our show. We do it just for the love of the topics. And we want to inspire some people and get them to ask some questions in their own life too. And I think if people do that, then we've done our job.
Yeah, and I will say on the episodes that I've been fortunate enough to watch as they're occurring, so when in your live stat, your YouTube chat group, the live chat feed is phenomenal, very interactive. Like you have people just constantly making comments, asking questions, providing additional information. It's a fantastic experience. Not all live shows have that level of interaction from the fan base, so I applaud you for that.
Yeah, we're very lucky. They're very polite, very classy people. We didn't have a moderator because we really didn't need one. There was nobody, you know, dropping F-bombs in the chat or trying to be an idiot. We did assign that wrench to a good friend of ours, more of like a Boy Scout badge and a token of our appreciation rather than out of necessity. But yeah, we love it when we see people having sidebar conversations about the topic. I know I've watched other people's live shows and people are talking about what they made for dinner and what they're doing next Thursday. They're not even listening to the show. So, yeah. And I guess it's hard. Some of these shows are 3 hours long, right? People, their attention span wanders.
Right.
So I guess some participation is better than none, but we've been very fortunate that the people are interested in these topics. They know a lot about it themselves. And we have people like sending us articles and cool things to consider, show ideas. And we really like that. We like the fact that we're available. You know, we answer everybody's message. You know, somebody friends us on Facebook and says, hey, I've got a question. We respond. And I think that's not a lot of content creators do that. Even though they want the engagement, they don't engage when they have the opportunity. So I'm proud to say that we consider ourselves pretty down to earth, hands-on. We're not doing this for fame or money. We're just doing it because we like doing it and we like talking about these things.
That's fantastic. So Marquise, a little bit about yourself.
I'm Marquise. I think Louis did such a fantastic job kind of breaking down who we are, what we do, and how things are that what can I say? I mean, but I will give you something. So I am UFO researcher, a nerd for the most part, and a geek as well, of course, tech geek specifically. So I spend a lot of time researching topics, a lot of different topics, to what Louis said earlier. We did talk about these things, a lot of them, extensively outside of our time with our separate shows or our respective shows. And we spent a lot of time with those shows, talking to people and about things. So it was interesting that we kind of felt like, at least for myself, and we talked about this, Louis, as well, we kind of felt restricted about what we can talk about. We built an audience of people that want one specific thing, and I wasn't even sure if I could branch out, because when I did branch out to these topics, these scientific topics, the things that require a little bit more concrete evidence, but have implications that are kind of immediate for people, for civilization, versus the UFO topic that is, I think, monumentally important, but it doesn't seem to be as urgently, as urgent as, for example, alternative energies that need to be implemented before, we all destroy ourselves or something like that.
Yeah.
So when you bring those things up, there's a lot of controversy in the field of UFOs. So it's important that we were able to build something different, and we did, and it's fantastic. To be honest, I'm more than happy to have done this.
Yeah, well, and like I said, I'll say it again, it's a fantastic show. And if those that are listening or watching get only one thing out of this episode, just go check out the Quantum Ladder podcast. It's a fantastic show. So, so let's go ahead and jump into, for my podcast, I am also similarly engaging other topics outside of the UFO, but still within the vein of what I call the mysterial, which is everything that mainstream considers strange or kind of outside of the norm. And so I want to know, do you all have any experiences yourselves with anything regarding UFOs, ESP, near-death experience, out-of-body experience, astral travel? I mean, the whole kit and caboodle. If you were to walk into a grocery store and say it, and somebody were to turn to you and give you like a weird stink eye type face, I want to know if you've had an experience doing it. So, who wants to go first, or do either of you have that?
Well, I've had a couple. I've had a definite UAP experience. I've never seen creatures. I also had a really weird encounter with the Northern Lights, where like a giant green ball formed out of the Northern Lights and scared the crap out of me and my friend. I had an experience the day that my grandmother passed. We came back from her funeral, and the phone rang, and it was all zeros, and it was her name on it, which was bizarre because she had lived in a nursing home for about 5 years before she passed, so she didn't have a home phone. But this was calling
Wow.
from a home phone. And my mom was there too, and I showed her. I'm like, what is this?" And she said, "Answer the phone." I answered it, and there was nothing there. And after about 10 seconds, it just went click. And the symbology behind that is my grandmother was very depressive and anxious lady. Like, she would call my mom 20 times a day just to make sure we were okay, you know? So when it came to the phone ringing, we automatically knew that's grandma calling on the
Yeah.
phone. And it was, perfectly fitting that when grandma passed, we got a phone call at the other end. And we truly believe that's, I don't know how that would have happened or how that looks. I think some
Yeah.
things, you can't find. But yeah, that was, and I've had a poltergeist experience. I used to own a car dealership. I had people moving chairs randomly around what I thought were people. So I basically threatened everybody with their job because staff were getting scared and people were getting freaked out and
Yeah.
not wanting to come to work. And I basically threatened everybody with their job. I said, "I'm installing hidden cameras. Whoever is doing this, when I find you, we're going to have a problem because you're hurting my business." And essentially, it got to a point where I was first key in, last key out. And I'd come in the morning and there'd be like a chair sitting in front of the men's bathroom, just mysteriously moved. We had a chair disappear, and it was down the emergency fire stairs, which we never went down.
Wow.
The chair was on the landing halfway down. And when I went down to get the chair, I was breaking like cobwebs for the first time. So how did the chair not do that
Wow.
when it went down half a flight of stairs? And I even had like my staff, I would go to the auto auction, buy cars. They would send me pictures of like weird things, like a chair that would just move, on the camera, just bizarre stuff. And I didn't really chalk it up to anything too serious because there was nothing bad happened. But subsequently, about 5 years later, I worked with a guy. I sold the dealership, and the guy that worked for the new owner, I met up with him about 5 years later, and he goes, "Hey, you remember that dealership you used to have? You know that place is haunted." And I literally went pale and instant goosebumps and numb, because then I realized this wasn't made up. It's not a joke.
Uh-huh.
It really was screwed up. We don't know what happened there. It was a new building, but you never know. The energies exist all over the place.
Yeah. I
So
mean, you don't know what was there before, right? So,
don't know what was there before. Yeah. And my UAP experience was, I think, 2 years ago. It was in October. We had a massive windstorm outside. All the planes were grounded and things like that.
Mhm.
And I just saw this big orange light in the sky. And so, of course, my friend works for MUFON. I'm like, "Hey, this is the direction I'm looking. Here's flight radar." Did all the usual things to rule out what it could be. And
Mhm.
he even told me, he said, "Hey, all the planes are grounded, man. It's like a windstorm. There's a regional airport
Right.
that had a lot of light aircraft. Well, they can't fly in 80-kilometer-an-hour winds." So I videotaped it for about 40 minutes. I got about 100 pictures, and the thing never moved. It never changed direction. And then at the very end, it started to move slowly to the right and then just went out, just like as if it was a candle that got blown out. It wasn't a quick blink. It was just like a slow, steady,
Just kind of
just
trailed away.
just fade out to nothing. So I don't know what it is. I've had some of the pictures enhanced up close. It almost looked like plasma energy. Every photo was slightly different. It's like the gas ball had changed. In some pictures, it looks kind of like a ring, but I think that's a camera distortion.
Yeah.
It was difficult to actually get a clear focus on it. The camera kept wanting to zoom out and zoom in, like it
Yeah.
knew something was there, but it couldn't really grasp what it was. But yeah, for 40 minutes, something sat totally still in a horrific windstorm and didn't move. And I don't know what kind of aircraft would
Yeah.
want to be in that or be able to stay totally stationary, right? So I know Marquise actually has some pretty interesting experiences that
Okay,
trump
well,
mine, but that's the extent of me, with weirdness, and enough to make me believe that we don't see everything that's going on.
So before we move on to Marquise, I was curious, in the case of your call from your grandmother, um, how did that kind of make you all feel, as far as the experience of, uh, let's just call it, communication from the other side? I mean, how did that affect you, on an emotional level, a psychic level, psychology level, etc.?
Yeah, it was. I don't want to say it was any real feeling. Like it was a surprise when we saw the phone because it rang and it rang. My parents used to have like an old cordless phone and it would
Mhm.
ring differently when it was long distance. My father's Portuguese. So when we'd get a call from Portugal, it would be a
Yeah.
different ringtone. So it had that ringtone, which was bizarre because you don't get that for domestic call.
Mhm.
But, when we saw that and, literally we had been home for an hour from just burying her, right? And I showed my mom and she was just kind of like sort of at peace with things and just like answer it. So I answered it and there was nothing there. And we didn't really talk much about it after. So I don't know what the impact would be for them. And my parents aren't really into this type of stuff. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of people just stick their head in the sand and be like, oh, wow, that's, you
Right.
can't quantify that. So let's not even think about that.
Right.
For me, it was, I guess, a peaceful thing. It was kind of more validation that, yeah, these things are possible. And, I don't know what it is, if it was a weird glitch in the system or what, but it had her full name as if it was a home phone. She hadn't had a home
Yeah.
phone for years. When it was, she would call from the nursing home, it was a different call display. There was no number. It was all zeros and there was nothing on the other end. Right. So
Mm.
I believe it was something,
Right.
but yeah, it didn't really leave me with an overwhelming feeling one way or the other. You'd think that you would just be blown away or shocked, but it was just kind of like, just sort of like a humble acceptance, just kind of like a knowing.
Mm.
So, mind you, she didn't pass tragically. Maybe it's just my personal experience. I was able to see her a couple days before she passed. She was
Mhm.
still with it. I was able to tell her, how important she was in my life and
Right.
all the good things, right? So I was okay with her passing. It wasn't
Mhm.
really any grieving on my part. Like she was 87. It's gonna happen. She
Mhm.
left, on good terms, didn't suffer. I told her I loved her. So it was like, yeah, all good. And then to get something like that, it was just kind of a nice cherry on top, but didn't freak us out, didn't make me feel weird. It was more of a knowing feeling rather than a questioning of like what the hell was
Yeah.
that?
And that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, thanks for sharing that additional information.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, Marquise, how about yourself?
I do want to preface this. I've been thinking about it a lot. So to be clear, I've had some pretty interesting experiences, close encounters. Okay. I will say I do not like talking about them because there's a stigma tied to
Yeah.
the abduction phenomena and contact, whatever people say. There's a lot of misinterpretation, misunderstanding, and then of course ridicule that happens to people that talk about this. But I do it because I know there are people who have had these experiences, and they want to know like what kind of people may be having them that I feel like that I trust. And I know that in our position, people tend to trust us. People tend to look at us as people who are at least moderately sane, because I think
Right.
we're all kind of going crazy here. And I think it's important for people to see, hey, look, we're just a couple normal dudes, and I've had experiences, couple of them. So I do this, talk about them for those people, and then anyone who wants to listen to it, fine. It's just data for many.
Mhm.
But if you don't believe it, I don't particularly care. But you don't have to tell me you don't believe it. Please keep that to yourself.
Right.
It doesn't matter to me, how people feel like that. To hear people say they don't believe me, that's fine. It happened. So now the experience. When I was much younger, I think I was 14 years old, 13 or 14 years old. I was at my grandmother's house in New Jersey, and she lived in a wooded area. It's surrounded by trees and forests, so it
Mhm.
was really beautiful there. And then like lots of farmland on the other side of this of the street.
Mhm.
So one side was all forest, the other side was all farmland. And she had a pretty big yard, but I remember waking up in the middle of the night. I slept in a second living room she had in her house because they had a really big pull-out couch, and I was a kid, so you get to sleep on this giant pull-out couch. It's the size of
Right.
the whole living room. It's pretty cool. It's a sectional pull-out couch. It was awesome. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was this really bright light, and I thought the police were there because my grandmother rents out to Mexicans, next door, but a lot of them aren't like legally allowed to be there.
Mm.
So to kind of help her, hope the FBI is not listening. To help people that she feels, they work hard, they pay their bills
Yeah.
every month. She never had a problem. And like, I'm 35. In over 35 years, she's never had one problem with her tenants. So she trusts this community very much. And they're very hard workers. They do a little bit of partying, but man, they're become some of the best tenants she's ever had. So I thought maybe the police got called because they like to party. And they were having a party, and there was a bunch of car lights like shining through the window, and the window was as big as the entire living room. So like the whole wall of the living room was all window. except for like two, maybe,
Yeah.
margins on the side.
Yeah, I definitely know what those picture windows look like. My the house I grew up in had one of those. So I'm
It's
definitely
pretty cool. It's pretty cool, man. Especially when it like in the winter or the fall. My favorite season is fall. It's beautiful to
yeah.
look outside. But anyway, and I look, the curtains were white. They had a see-through one that was just, I guess, like a dressing over top of the real curtain, which was solid white, but you could see it just beaming light shining through. So I got up and I pulled the curtain back, and as I pulled the curtain back, there was a light shining on the grass in a circle, like a cone. And it coned like there was a big circle on the grass, and then it coned up like this.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, and now when I think about this, like retrospectively, why was there a light shining in my room? I'm kind of going through this every time I do this. I don't know why the light was shining through the window, but when I look outside, it's just a cone of light in the grass. Like, were they trying to get my attention? Is that an
Hmm.
effect of the craft? People talk about seeing something very similar, yet the cone of light is localized on the grass, not on the window. So it
Right.
just kind of is bizarre to me. I don't know what that's about. But instead of looking directly at the craft, I for some reason saw the base where the circle was, and I followed the cone to its source. And its source was a disc, like a the typical flying saucer, if you will.
Hmm.
The disc shape with the dome on top, and it was relatively flat compared to like what you would see in a bulky craft that has
Right.
lots of people in it. And it wasn't that big. It was not that big, but it was hovering just above the tree line.
Hmm.
And it was wobbling a little bit like this, just a little bit, slowly wobbling like this,
Hmm.
and shining that light. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's a freaking UFO. That's a UFO. And as soon as I said that in my head, that light started to move towards the window, towards me, and it slowly moved across the grass, up the wall, and as soon as it hit the window and the light like hit me, and I blacked out. When I
Hmm.
opened my eyes a moment later, like it was like I blinked my eyes, it was morning time, like it was just coming up, sunrise was just coming up. Don't know what happened. I've never been regressed. I don't want to be honest. I've heard too many horror stories. I've got enough problems. I don't think I want to revisit that. And the other experience was a little bit more terrifying and personal. I was just going through my divorce, and it was a really bad time in my life. And there was a lot going on ambiently in my life. And I stayed at my cousin's house who lived in town, a local town.
Hmm.
And in the living room was where I slept. And I'm going to try to briefly describe this, but when you walk into the front door, you can see directly through the living room, kitchen,
Hmm.
dining room, and the backyard, because the back door has a glass window
Hmm.
on it that's the side, a strip of window, so you can see all the way through the back to the backyard. So like, it was a pretty open shot for that, and there's a relevance to that part. Well, I was laying in the living room, and I don't know why I had this feeling like they're coming. That was a thought in my mind. They're coming. And I started to beg. And I was begging, like, please not this time, please not tonight. I don't want this
Hmm.
experience right now. I don't want it. As if I had a choice, first of all. And it was weird because to me, it made me feel like a part of me knew this was happening. And I was panicking. I was completely panicking, but I couldn't move. And then I looked up through the living room, through the kitchen and dining room to the back door, and I just knew they were coming. And all of a sudden, there was this creature, the typical big black, big head, big black eyes that were huge, pure black, and they had like I want to say like a string, like a bluish gray color
Hmm.
of skin, and it was smooth, really smooth, like perfectly smooth skin. And it was wearing this like one piece suit that cut off, like had a collar neck,
Hmm.
and it just flowed to their wrists. So like their hands were the only thing that would, like, it was a little bit of the wrist kind of showing, not that they had a wrist that we have, but it just, that's
Right.
what it looked like to me. And it wasn't walking, it was hovering, and it
Hmm.
went straight through the back door, and I freaked out. It just brought my panic to
Hmm.
something that was just beyond terror. It was beyond terror. Never felt anything like this before. I say this all the time, but if I were thrown into to the ocean, surrounded by sharks, I would be less terrified
Hmm.
than I was when I saw them. And So they're coming. They went through the window like it wasn't even there. They just faced through it. There were three of
Mhm.
them, and they went through and they were hovering all the way there. And I was still begging and freaking out. And I looked at the clock and I said, I'm gonna remember this time. I'm not gonna forget.
Mhm.
And it was somewhere around 11 o'clock, 11:30. And as they were coming down the walkway, and I was looking at that clock, when I looked back in front of me, they were there, leaning forward. Their faces were like right there. And
Mhm.
the one of them was right in front of my face like this. I mean, like I could if
Mhm.
my nose was a little bit longer, I probably would have hit it with my nose. It was that close, and its eyes were freaking huge. I was terrified. And in my head, this thing, it had a slit for a mouth, no, like two little
Mhm.
slits for like the nostrils, no ears, completely smooth. It said, "Don't worry, we won't hurt you." And I blacked out.
Mhm.
And as soon as I opened my eyes, it was 3:30 in the morning. I'm getting a little, oh man, it's such
Oh,
a freaky
you're fine.
experience. So
You're fine.
yeah.
Well, I mean, thanks for sharing that experience. I I also have an abduction experience, but I don't remember most of mine. And um, I want to go get hypnosis done to try to uncover more of it. Um, but I also, it's not like when I when I get my budgeted allowance every month that
Yeah.
that I set aside for myself and my wife, that it's not like first on the top of my list to get
Right.
hypnosis to find out
Yeah.
what's going on.
Milk, eggs,
Um,
bread,
I mean,
yeah,
hypnosis.
listen, man, from one experiencer to another, I don't like the term, but I get it. I I was terrified of just seeing them.
Mhm.
I can't imagine what it would be like to know what they did. And every most, a lot of I hear a lot of stories, they're, oh, there was that study that was done. And again, the details are a bit vague for me, but Grant Cameron talks about it often. He has in the past about the experiencers that were a part of a study. And I
Mhm.
believe Linda, oh my gosh, on X, Twitter, I can't remember. There was a researcher that researched that and was close to the researchers involved in that study. They fudged those that data. They said that they did a was it like 5,000 or so, or 5,000+ people um were interviewed about their experience, and they took that data in. They said, oh well, most people had positive experiences. They
Mhm.
lied. They did not most have positive experiences. And Linda, who was on X, she actually called out some people on X who were saying, oh, they're mostly good, and everybody that had bad ones are either, they're part of a psyop, and the government did it. Which is even more, to be honest, asinine than the idea of extraterrestrials to a person that doesn't believe. That's a skeptic.
Right.
It's asinine to think that, in my opinion. Not that it doesn't happen at all, but to believe that the majority is only positive, and that the ones that are not positive you know, must be bad. If you, it doesn't align with history, human
Mhm.
history, and in the interaction with what I believe are these intelligences. So
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know.
it's hard sometimes, I think, because well, number one, all of our experiences are from a human perspective, right?
Mhm.
So that's the way we're going to view contact, is we're going to apply that human lens at whatever that we look at. And so and I'm not trying to argue positive or
No,
negative of
it's
that's not what I'm trying. I'm just simply trying to say that because we as humans are sometimes barbaric in our practices, that we still
Mhm.
kill each other. We
Mhm.
we'd rather kill each other than just settle our differences in some other more mature way. Like, because though we think that way and we act that way as a majority, not necessarily at the individual level, but because we do, we apply that same bias to whatever might be coming here. And we just say, well,
Mhm.
if they wanted to enslave us, they would have done it 1,000 years ago, because clearly their technology is greater than ours. Well, just because that's what we've done in our past doesn't mean
Mhm.
that's what some other entity would want to do to us. And so, all that to be said, that I do think there's a mixture of experiences. Some are perceived positive, and some are perceived negative, and some are perceived neutral.
Hmm.
And I do also think that, from a strictly logic perspective, just logic, if you have to assume that there are um, entities, let's say, that are on the full spectrum of whether or not they care about us. So some don't care about us at all, some care about us a whole lot, and some are somewhere in the middle. And so, the whole idea that we as a species try to lump these things into buckets, and we say, well, they're all they all hate us, or they all love us,
Yeah.
or they all don't, they're indifferent, or they're all coming from space, so they're all coming from an inner dimension, or it's all nuts and bolts, or it's all plasma energy. It's the idea, though, that we can't logically say that they're all one thing, because we're not all one thing, right? And so from that human perspective, we have to realize what's we have to remember that, we can't just always assume that how we would treat things, how we would respond, is how they would respond. Now, your situation is truly horrifying, and I have met and talked with a lot of contactees and abductees that have had similar horrifying type experiences. My One of my best friends did a podcast with me, a different podcast, and he shared an experience that he had, where he was asleep in the recliner, and he woke, and his body was paralyzed, and there were these two dark entities standing over him with red eyes.
Mm.
And he remembered something that I had said, which was, maybe your mind perceives these things as being fear inducing, and so that's how you respond. So instead of just reacting in fear next time, if it happens, try to interact with them. So that's what he did. He tried to interact with them when he realized it was happening, and he said that they just had this big grin on their face, and they said, "Look at to him they said, look at this guy trying to interact with us. He doesn't know." And so, then he went ahead and just kind of blacked out from there. But I do think, and there's actually a lot of I watched a documentary about the moon not too long ago, about the possibility that there may be some species that's inhabiting the moon. The moon is just fascinating to me anyway, but
Mm.
and that species preys on and it feeds on our fear. The
Yeah.
idea that
David
we
Icke,
might be,
right?
cattle of sorts, but not in the way that they want to eat our meat, but that they want to eat our fear. And it does certainly seem that, we definitely have, in our societal norms, we have times where fear is running rampant. And it makes you wonder if that's some sort of a stimuli that's being introduced to the human condition, so that there's a bountiful feast ready for something to feast on. So I don't know. It's a fascinating topic. There are many facets of exploration in the topic, and I, for one, try not to rule anything out, because until we know an answer, anything is plausible.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think to
I'm
your
with. I
point
agree with
too,
you.
though, we think from a human perspective. So what would we do? And we interpret what we see in terms of humans. But what if that's not the play at all? And,
Right.
the more people like Diana Pasulka or Gary Nolan are talking about, spirits and souls and things like that, it seems to be less and less nuts and bolts. We're trying to, figure out the play through the human lens. But I think maybe it's outside of that. And I think that's why we're not getting the answers we are. Some people
Yeah.
think it's even more nefarious than that they've infiltrated, they've bred with us, they're invisible, there is an agenda. I mean, you can get as conspiracy and as deep into it as you want. And everybody's opinion's valid because nobody knows.
Right.
So even if you're way out there, that's just my opinion that you're way out there. You might actually
Right.
be correct because I don't friggin' know either, you know?
Right.
So, but I think we are missing something fundamental about it because all the greatest minds that are doing work on this right now and thinking about it, nobody's really coming close. And it's definitely not as simple as they come here, they take some cows, they
Right.
abduct people.
Yeah.
You know, like then you look at experiences of Whitley Strieber and Calvin Parker and, you know, Travis Walton and things like that. And it seems like, you know, there's an agenda, there's a lot of similarities. But then on the other side of things, people have stories that don't match any of that. And it was nothing like your typical UFO and, you know, abduction. So we're either dealing with many different things or many different creatures, or people's recollection is just very poor. Maybe memories are planted, screen memories. You know, if you witness a car accident, 2 weeks later, your rendition is going to be somewhat different than, and so will everybody else's version of the events, right? So we're not very good at being, unless we're trained observers, but even then, we throw them out the window too and be like, Top Gun fighter jet, you're just an idiot. You don't know what you saw. Like, come on. You got a guy flying a $500 million plane. He doesn't know what the hell's up in the air. Like these people know.
Clearly, it was a Batman balloon. I mean, that's
right.
He wouldn't have mistaken that at all.
Oh no, Bart Simpson.
Yeah. When we have people that fake things, when you have fake Atacama mummies and stuff like that, it's almost like it's intentional to keep the tinfoil hat on the believers. Keep us looking stupid, keep it out of the mainstream topic, make it look like there's no progress being made because, hey, they're still faking things in the desert, right? So those people definitely aren't helping the movement. And, you know, there's a distinct divide between people just trying to cash in and make money off of this thing and people that, you know, really want to find out, maybe because they've heard stories like myself, they're just super curious, or people that have actually had physical experiences that know damn well something happened. And even though they might admit that they don't know fully what that was, you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, because you can't define what happened to you, therefore it didn't happen. Like, that's totally ridiculous. Something is happening, and it's not mass psychosis. John Mack already did the work on that. People aren't losing their mind. But there is, I will say this, and it might sound controversial, but there is a faction of the UFO community that I believe is slightly suffering from something in the mental realm. I don't know if people aren't medicated like they should be or over medicated or what, but some people, it's just like, it's almost becoming like an obsession. It's like they're kind of getting sick from it. They're going a little bit loopy. They're starting to get really, really out there. And I don't know if that is in fact the decay of some type of mental condition, if it's depression with, you know, rearing its ugly head. But there seems to be a difference in some of the people that are just like, oh, we're doomed. And every little thing they see will now fit that narrative, right? Because we create our own reality. So anytime you see a commercial, it's like, oh, that's the reptiles trying to get to us and stuff like that. Like they're very quick. It's like politics. You got far right and far left. We got the same thing in the UFO world. And, you know, those are the people that others will prey on, typically the skeptics and the debunkers, and say like, really, this guy, you believe what this guy's telling you? And they'll pick one bad apple and they'll throw away everybody else's legitimate testimony. Even if they work for the CIA and things like that, they still don't get any credit because you're just like that guy.
And it's really for the most part because most of, and I'm not trying to sound conspiratorial here, but most of mainstream media is not a news organization. It's an advertising agency. And so it's whatever is going to draw people in to sell Coke or Colgate toothpaste or whatever the case may be. So, you know, they're going to grab the quote unquote kooks, right? As they portray them, because that's what other people are going to tune into and, you know, sell more ad time. So I completely agree that I think that there are people in the community that are so desperate to know the answer that they grasp at anything that looks like an answer.
There's worse. There's another faction, by the way. The people that you know, there's this joke about living in the Matrix. You know, if we're living in the Matrix, but yet everything is so important to you. But if we're living in the Matrix, nothing really matters because nothing is real, and so therefore all you have to do is just carry out the simulation until its end. Everything else is irrelevant. The idea that well, no one can ever know anything about the phenomena, and I also have a very controversial view. I think just to be clear, my view is not the most popular. The idea that, well, it could literally be anything, right? It could literally be anything, and therefore we can never know anything about it. That's not true. It could literally, this is a statement, it could literally be anything, but that doesn't that doesn't necessarily mean that therefore everything is true. That you have to prove things. You have to prove that there's something happening. In the nature of this phenomena, it is, you guys are both right. There is a little bit of confusion about what the nature of it is because it's so diverse. However, when I look at the phenomena, and I've always, thought this way, maybe it is my interpretation. It is clearly, but I mean, maybe it's my projection, right, on the phenomena. But when I look at the data, you mentioned John Mack, David Jacobs, for example, Carla Turner, for another example, Phil Schneider, even Tom DeLonge. But we don't have to go that far. Jim Semivan. Like, there is a pretty pertinent narrative that we should be concerned about with the phenomena, even though there may be another aspect that's positive. I do believe in positivity. I do believe that there is an energy, a life force, a God, if you will, that is not bad. But I don't think that's what we're dealing with when I hear the stories of people like Linda Porter, or when I hear the stories about someone like Whitley Strieber, or when I hear there's a documentary that it's about 10 minutes long, one of the best documentaries I've ever seen to condense the UFO phenomena, the experiencer phenomena, into a very clear indication that there's something that's interfering with the development and in the psychology, and maybe even the spiritual development of humankind. That's not a benevolent act in any sense of the word. Doesn't mean that it's evil, but in our interpretation as humans is that we prefer things that help us, not hurt us. We would never say that a lion is probably good for us. We just don't understand why understand the fact that it needs to eat sometimes. So why not go hang out with it? Why aren't we trying to make contact with the lions? Don't think you want to do that. I think that if you consider the potential for what this phenomena could represent in terms of the problem, you might not want to, let your guard down with that perspective, that potential perspective. It may be adversarial, and that's not just a perspective. That's based off of the data that's been presented by some of the people that I mentioned. Lou Elizondo even mentioned, in a sense, that there could be a somewhat of a problem. They call it in the halls of Congress a UFO problem. Members of Congress are suggesting that it's demonic. Not that I believe them. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that whatever they perceive about the phenomena represents a type of not good for humanity that might be a concern. Might want to pay attention to those words, not believe the exact terminology, but the essence of what's being said here is problematic.
So I think, though, in not that I disagree, because there are definitely a lot of different narratives that are being put forth by I don't like to use the word expert, because you can't be an expert on something that nobody knows anything about. But let's just say loud voices, loud voices in the community. And the thing that I see, though, that is recursive is that everyone who has a theory on what the phenomena represents looks at data in a way that supports their theory, right? It's like the old joke of 99% of statistics are fake. Well, that's you're using a statistic to make a statistic joke. So it's the same type thing, and so I think, though, that there has to be, I think, an air of caution. Just because Jeremy Corbell or George Knapp or any of the other folks that are kind of big names in the community, Nick Pope, so on and so forth, just because they have their own thought around what the phenomena is, and because they get interviewed on TV, still doesn't make them an expert in the phenomena.
100%.
And so I think we sometimes have to be a little careful that we don't assign credibility where maybe that credibility hasn't been earned. You know, George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell, Nick Pope, all those things I just mentioned, yeah, they get to talk to a lot of people. But realize this, that no one's going to break their NDA. So all the information that they're getting has been scrubbed by the Pentagon. It's been said, okay, this is good to release.
Can we turn this around? Let me ask you a question, because
go ahead.
This is really interesting. I'm actually really enjoying the back and forth here, because I think it's important. What do you think the phenomena represents? What do you think it is?
So I think it's people based. I think that humans are the key component for the phenomena. Of all the abductees that I've ever talked to or read their accounts or listened to their shows or documentaries or whatever, no one has ever mentioned being on a ship, being walking down the hallway and looking into another room and seeing a dolphin on an exam table, or a moose, or a dog, or a cat, or a bird. It's always other people. Now, yeah, we got cattle mutilations, and that's a thing. And I'm not necessarily saying that, you know, that's doesn't really argue against or support my position, but I'll just say that I think all the phenomena in all of its entirety, everything that makes up the Mysterial, as I've coined the show, is for the benefit of people. And so we are the key element. As long as we continue to examine data as it relates to barometric pressure and magnetometer readings and all this stuff about the craft that are appearing, we're missing a key element of the phenomena, and that's the people who have the experiences. With the exception of maybe yourself and a few others, most of the people who I've talked to have had profound experiences, have them at a moment in their life when they're going through some stuff.
I know.
And they're trying to figure out like what the next step in life is going to be for them.
Interesting.
Then they have a profound experience with some aspect of the phenomena that causes them to rethink their reality, causes them to question the path that they're on, where they've been, where are they going. And in that act of questioning all of that stuff, the nature of their reality, they usually find themselves on a better path than what they would have been on had they not had the experience. And yes, sometimes the experiences are intense. People have near-death experiences, right? I mean, I don't want to have a near-death experience, but they do. But I also think that those experiences are tailored to the person who has the experience, so that it's the right level of experience to elicit that thought form kind of questioning response that it's supposed to elicit. For some people, just seeing a UFO in the sky is enough. That's all they need to question the nature of their reality. For other people, they need a near-death experience, or perhaps even a frightening abduction experience.
Do you believe in life after death?
I do. I've had a lot of interaction with, we'll call them entities for now, that know things about. Oh, so I'll tell you. Just 1 minute. You're familiar with what these are?
Yeah, dowsing rods.
Yeah,
dowsing rods, right? So, I used these shortly after my grandmother-in-law passed away. Was in Florida with my wife and her mom and her sister, sitting on the couch and holding the dowsing rods. And the dowsing rods are restrictive. You can only get yes and no answers, you know, cross for yes, open for no. But I asked my wife, I said, would you like to talk with your grandmother? And she was hesitant at first, but she decided to. So I asked her to ask questions in her head that I did not know the answer to, and let the rods respond. And for every question that he asked, the rods responded correctly. Again, these are in her head. I'm not hearing them. And the rods are responding appropriately. we've had other experiences like that where we went to Disneyland. We were in a hotel next to Disneyland using the rods again. I asked Walt Disney a question that I know nothing about. I know nothing about Walt Disney other than he started Disneyland. But my wife knew the answer. And so rods responded in kind. And my wife confirmed it was the correct answer. So that's why I believe in some sort of an afterlife, because how else would that be explainable? I mean, I guess I could be psychically pulling the answer out of the person's head. But I have no reference that I'm doing that. I have no, I'm not reaching in and searching for the answer. But yeah, so that's where I do believe in an afterlife. That, and I took a picture of a ghost once, so that was just as colorful as you and I are. Wasn't the wispy white smoky stuff that you see in movies and stuff. Just as colorful as you and I. So, yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate I apologize. I'm just curious, because a lot of times whenever, especially with these conversations, people tend to, and you, like all of us, each one of us has a different perspective about the phenomena. I think there may be some things that kind of intersect, but for the most part, I lean a little differently than what most people lean towards, most people. And it's always interesting to hear how people see how they see the phenomena versus how I see it. Just in case maybe there's something I'm not seeing. I will say this though, when you have a personal experience, a lot of people who have personal experiences tend to believe more in whether it be the paranormal or, in this case, UFOs, non-human intelligences, aliens, whatever you want to believe. It's easier for us to see that there is another phenomena, another intelligence other than just us living here. I always wonder though, that I always wonder, why would it be that we should trust these experiences over the greater the amalgamation of data that's present? Because a lot of times, I was watching a video yesterday, and there was it was like a ball that was morphing and changing over time, and they sped it up, and it created a pattern. And I was like, wow, that's beautiful. That's a really cool, beautiful pattern. But then they played it again in slow motion, and it was just nonsensical in real time, like a real time, second by second. It made no sense. It was just random. And things were happening so slow that you couldn't perceive the overall message that was being sent. There was a design, there's a pattern, there's something beautiful to be seen here. And when we look at data, whether it be personal experience or otherwise, given, by the way, our personal experiences can be, as has been stated by abduction researchers, experienced researchers, they manipulate our perceptions. They, being whoever this intelligence is, tend to manipulate the screen memories you mentioned earlier. The idea that you can wake up and see a clown saying, come on, let's go, when it's not a clown, it's one of them. You can see a giant bunny rabbit. It's not that, it's one of them. A giant owl. It's not that, it's them. Our perceptions of what they look like varies based off of what they want us to see versus what we want to see. And it's a mixture of what's in our subconscious, because they can read our minds according to the data. They can read into our minds. They're pulling that information out and showing us what we want to see, or that might be easier for us to accept, versus us projecting it. Because what we want to do in life is experience pleasure. Yet we're constantly bombarded with stress and problems. Why can't we make those same things happen less viscerally than an abduction experience or an encounter? Because trust me, it's very engaging to be in an abduction experience. Why would a lesser experience be harder for you to manifest than one as great as an abduction encounter? I think that what's happening is there are things being manipulated within us by them, and I do not trust that process. Doesn't mean that it's all bad, by the way. I don't think that at all. I'm going to be very clear. I don't think that. I just think that what we're dealing with, especially at mass, if you look at the totality of the data, absent of these figures that are making claims, the data speaks for itself. We've got a problem here. From the ancient Egyptian gods who used to have people sacrifice, virgins or whatever, to beyond that, when there were wars between gods in the Bhagavad Gita, the wars, the Vimanas that were talked about in ancient Hindu religions, to the devil in the Bible who is competing with God for the soul of mankind. There are ample examples of entire civilizations believing that there's a conflict between two intelligences, maybe more actually, possibly many more, according to different religious texts and historical accounts that we're dealing with to this day. And I worry that we are allowing potentially through the fact that there isn't anything clear enough to say it's definitively this or that. We are allowing a phenomena to suggest that, hey, the thing that you're experiencing, it may feel bad, but actually it's for your own good. And if you haven't seen Children of Men, you might, or Childhood's End, I'm sorry, you might want to check that out.
So it's an interesting take, and I appreciate your honesty and your candidness. I really do. And you may be perfectly right. You may be
I may be
100%.
wrong. I may be very wrong, though. I hope I'm wrong. I don't want to be right about this, by the way. I hate my perspective.
Yeah, but you're not the only one talking about this trickster element. A lot of people are saying that.
Yeah.
Even when I interviewed Jim Semivan 2 years ago, like he was so good at keeping his cool the whole show, and then at the end he just come out and said these things are effing with us. Like, former CIA guy. Now he's just being real. So I do agree with what Marquise is saying. Don't take your experience as if it was actually how that happened, right? Anything that is that advanced, that can transverse however the hell they're getting here and going, they can do just about anything. So if we're like, well, they would do this, but they would never do that, how do we know? Again, we're looking at it through human spectacles. Just because we would or wouldn't, or you individually would or wouldn't, right? We all are in different ends of the spectrum of would you help somebody if you could, or would you not, right? So if there is other life, there's going to be some level of spectrum, but don't trust what you're seeing is actually what you're seeing. And I interviewed George Knapp after he came out with Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And I said, George, you've been doing this since the 80s. Like, what do you want people to know? And he's like, change your mind as often as you need to, I thought I had it figured out. It was nuts and bolts. And then I start getting into like Skinwalker Ranch, and it's like, what do you mean Bigfoot and UFOs? What do you mean dog man and feline entities and all this? The world just goes crazy, but it's plausible because maybe it's all just a show. Maybe ghosts and cryptids and aliens are all the same phenomena, or it's just different facets of the same phenomenon. It's not necessarily rank and file. Like, again, we're trying to do it as a human. We're trying to make sense of it. These are the good ones. These are the bad ones. These guys are my friend. Nothing to do with the Bigfoot, or everything to do with Bigfoot. Some people believe Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature. Others believe it is an interdimensional being, right? So,
or an alien pet, or like an extraterrestrial pet. I've heard that before too, which, I mean,
I don't think anything is impossible. And I certainly, if there was a nefarious agenda, that would be how you would do it. You would replace bad thoughts with good thoughts, and you would make people feel like this was for their own benefit, right? And even just the shock and awe of seeing what you're seeing and going through it, you're probably in a pretty vulnerable state that whatever is said or done is going to stick with you. So if these things are like, we're not hurting you, I mean, ask Whitley Strieber if they didn't hurt him, But on the flip side, Whitley also says, I don't.
It wouldn't change it for the world.
It wouldn't change it. It made me a better person somehow, right? So
I think just like I was talking about before around, how we see things, and, you just mentioned it too. I see things through the human perspective. We also have this want to, again, from a bucketing perspective, we have this idea of duality, right? That if something good exists, then there must also be something bad that exists, right? And so that coupled with, fear and anxiety around not necessarily being in control of your life. I reference it a lot, the movie The Matrix, because not so much that we live in a matrix, but I do think that the movie The Matrix has some insightful information around how we perceive life. And I went and a few weeks back, I went and saw someone at the Phoenix MUFON here in Phoenix, Arizona, speaking around near-death experiences, specifically hers, but then also giving some stats and some things around other people who have had near-death experiences. And one of the things that she kind of talked about and related it to was that we don't live in a physical world. We live in an energetic world, and then all of us and everything that we see and everything that we touch and interact with is just energy. It's just atoms strung together. And a different
I
formula
got to
or
say real quick. I'm
recipe.
sorry. The funny thing about what you just said, and this is really awesome, by the way, if when you look, this is the thing that got me into science. The only difference, why do atoms like repel each other? How come my hand doesn't just go straight through this table? Why do I have a hand at all? Why are there different things
Right.
at all? That is a phenomena I think is, I mean, as mysterious as it really is, it to me is one of the most important phenomena of existence. Why is anything the way that it is? Why is anything like this? It shouldn't be, because you're right, that we're just a collection of atoms, the density of which changes in frequency, changes the chemistry. It creates chemistry and creates, these different compounds that ultimately make up things. And we're manipulating them. Of course, we're doing them in a way that we believe is physical. We have
Mhm.
to touch and grab and use our hands and have dexterity and so forth, but in mixing with intelligence. But I heard Peter Levenda say in a recent interview that consciousness, and by the way, he suggests that other scientists like Gary Nolan, there's a potential for reality not being, or consciousness not being something that happens as a consequence of the biological brain, but the exact opposite. That there
Mhm.
is a brain because there is a consciousness,
Right.
and that the origin of who and what we are is not that there is this biology that sprouts a consciousness, but that there is a consciousness that ultimately creates in this physical reality a brain. I mean, that's interesting. I
Now
don't
that's
know.
yeah, and that is so that is something that I also have thought about before and have actually discussed on this podcast. And then I was recently interviewed by Deb Shakti for her new podcast that she's
She's
coming out
awesome.
with. And so
We love her.
something I talked about there too, that but you're right. I mean, they call it the seat of consciousness, right? They call the brain the seat of consciousness, the mind. And I really do think that that's the case, but not because that's where consciousness lives, but because literally that's where the pilot sits.
Mm.
And we are just a biological flesh and blood mechanical, marvel that interacts in this physical world. And we do so because we are conducting an experiment. And this
Mm.
is the means by which we conduct the experiment. Why does the physical realm exist? Because it's needed for the experiment.
There's a listen, there's a couple of theories that frustrate me to no end. And if they're true, man, that sucks. Like, just to be clear, I don't I don't know.
Mhm.
I want to be very, very clear. I have no idea what's going on. Anybody who claims to know,
Yeah,
there's something right about that.
yeah.
So
Snake
I
oil.
appreciate, yeah, it's snake. Don't trust that. I have no idea. But I get frustrated by because if it might be true, that's the problem. You might be right that this might be an experiment. These are real possibilities that I'm now thinking about. What if this is an experiment by, like, we create a simulation? What if there is an intelligence from another dimension potentially that is able to manipulate the reality that we live in now to be the way that it is? And we're just living out this experiment to see, I don't know, what happens. Or what if we are an equally plausible possibility? What if they're not just harvesting? What if they're not just like potentially just like feeding off for energy? What if they're literally feeding off the human soul? George Knapp there's a couple people that have come out recently have suggested that the reason why they won't tell people, and I wanted to read a thread here a little later whenever if there's any extra time, but that there's a possibility that these things are literally harvesting the human soul, that they wait for us after we die, and that the experience of life after death is some kind of a process that they put us through for some purpose that they use our
Mm.
soul for.
Like a
I
Starlight
don't
Pit.
know if that, like, dude, if it's true, oh my God, you can't tell people that. By the way, you're not really, there's nothing real about you. And when you die, that thing that keeps going, yeah, they're gonna take it, and you don't
Mhm.
really own it anyway. Like,
Yeah.
what? You can't tell people that. So
Yeah.
if any of these things are true, they all suck. They all suck. But who knows? Like, we're all
But
kind of
yeah,
guessing
and
at this.
I
Yeah.
think that's probably the theme of today's, discussion and episode is that no one really does know. All right. And so just like I was talking to somebody the other day around the concept of death, right? And so why do we know, or why do we know that we die?
Mm.
And I was, the question was, how would you talk to somebody about death if their experiences are different from yours? And my response was, well, I think I would talk to them about the fact that we know that we will die is because it's to influence how we live, right?
Mm.
To know that this will one day end should want you to live life to the fullest, to take chances, to love deeply, whatever the case may be, but to really make use of this life. Even if you believe in reincarnation, you don't really know. And so I think, to use that same, as an analogy, maybe just knowing about the phenomena, knowing the phenomena exist, is really just to encourage us to live life differently, to strive for the stars, to strive to understand all aspects of physical life, all aspects of why the planets exist. How did they get here? Is Earth really flat? I don't think so, but maybe it is.
Mhm.
But but really, that's what knowing about the phenomena is like a muse. I don't know, whatever. But it's like a muse for us, right? It's to encourage us to be artistic in how we paint our life. So
One thing we haven't mentioned is you talked about the duality, how we have it's us and it's them, or it's those creatures and those creatures. And if you chat with Michael Paul Masters, brilliant anthropologist, he basically says this is us in the future. And at first it seemed a little bit strange, but to me, in my mind, if somebody says, what do you make of the phenomenon? Based on my experience and my limited mind as a human, that makes the most sense to me, because you always want to look for cause, motivation, why, why just abduct cows for nothing or just mess with people to scare them. But it makes a bit more sense when you look at how humans used to look. Fast forward evolution, how we look today, our jaws are shrinking, our heads are getting larger. Fast forward that another million years, we become a gray, bigger heads, our eyes change, our jawlines shrink, we get spindly arms because we're not hunting and foraging.
right.
And a lot of experiencers, when they've actually interacted with the abductor, said, like, who are you? And a lot of times the answer is, we are you, or somehow we are connected to you, or we are part of you, or we are like you. Very similar in its reply. So, fast forward however many years, if we do have to leave this planet and live somewhere else, we will look different. Maybe we can't reproduce. It's already happening now. I mean, we did a water episode a couple weeks ago talking about estrogen, feminizing elk in Montana, and the X and Y chromosome. The Y chromosome's dying out. There's more females than males, even in the animal world. So fast forward this 100, 1,000, 10,000, whatever the number is, it's totally possible that in order to keep ourselves going, we do have to harvest genetic material or do something crazy like we're observing and like millions of people are observing. That seems to make no sense. But what makes no sense to me is that it's for nothing. Has to be some reason. There has to be I still believe in creation and intention. If it is a matrix simulation, whatever, the question I want to know is why, because I don't believe it's for nothing. We're not just here for a good time. Why are we sentient? Why are we awake? It doesn't have to be that way, but it is. So,
And the thing you have to ask yourself, and I think only each person can answer this question for themselves, is what does the answer look like, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, why? Well, what if somebody said this is why? Would you accept it or would you reject it because it doesn't fit into the narrative? And so
depends where it came from, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. If Stephen Greer told me, I'd be like,
if you get the answer to why out of your experience, was that the real answer? So if you go around saying, hey, my life has been changed, I know stuff, they told me things, they enlightened me, how credible is that information? You don't really know the source motivation for those creatures, right? Is it a benevolent thing? You really will never know.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about, again, I am of the persuasion, I don't like the term ancient aliens because of the TV series, but there is a reality there. There is a clear reality that something has been interacting with us for thousands of years at a minimum. There's indications, according to abduction, if you want to go with even the experiencer phenomena, that they have made statements and claims that they were involved with with genetically manipulating us in our development as a biological organism. There's claims of them being everything from angels to demons to gods to fairies and gnomes and all kinds of different things. I think that we need to be very careful. Let's put it this way. If John Max, if David Jacobs is wrong, right? we all live happily ever after. The space brothers come down. Stephen Greer is right, and our space brothers are going to save us from global catastrophe. But if he's wrong, and any one of the alternatives are right, we're screwed, man. Like we're screwed. Even the worst part about that possibility is that there. If I were to, if you're a super intelligent, non-human intelligence or whatever you are, you're able to not only infiltrate but appear to be just like us. There are people who will accept you instantly if you were to ever make yourself known, and they would be like your evangelists. In the I don't want to again. I Childhood's End is a very freaking awesome movie, but in that movie, TV series, there I don't want to give it all away, but someone becomes the ambassador for these aliens, these other intelligences, only to ultimately be discarded as if they are nothing. Not for their own agenda, but for the agenda of this intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't end like anything you could imagine. I didn't even imagine it, but I will tell you that the deception was clear from the beginning. Yet the person who this person that was very grounded in reality and science and empirical evidence, so to speak, they were the one to be the ambassador for this intelligence that has been, according to the movie, talked about for millennia. And by the way, they weren't talked about in a positive light. So it just bothers me that there are ambassadors. There are real ambassadors out there who are like, they love you. There are space, but they're here to save us. Ignore every bad thing you've ever heard because it's human made. It's the government. It's your misinterpretation. You projected that into, it's because you're a bad person. If you didn't have bad thoughts in your heart, what about you? Like, what kind of person are you to tell me that right. It's insane to me that there's not at least a balanced perspective, a balanced one. Not one or the other, but balanced.
I was as I was sitting here listening, I wondered if do you consider yourself a realist, an optimist, or a pessimist?
I consider myself a realist.
Okay.
I look at information. I will say that I am pessimistic about my realism. For example, a lot of things in this life tend to seem to be quite negative. We are constantly being bombarded by things that want to harm or kill us, including each other. We have to, from the time we wake up to the time we lay our head down to sleep, strive against everything from gravity to the stress of having to just survive. And it's always been that way, and it probably always will be, as far as I can understand in this life. So to me, it's not necessarily that, oh, everything's a gloom and doom. We have to find at least the light within all of this reality, which isn't great.
Right. The only reason I ask is I suspect, and I've never talked to him, so I don't know, but I suspect that like Dr. Stephen Greer would probably consider himself an optimist.
He would consider himself an evangelist, or maybe even.
I don't want to get into his narcissistic.
Sorry,
but he would still probably consider him. Like, if I asked him the same, right, three choices, I'm sure he would choose optimist as his choice, just based on how he presents himself and the messages right that he conveys. And so I wonder if that's, some of that is somehow influencing us in how we view the phenomena as well. If you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, then you're going to assume that the phenomena is here to hurt you. If you're always thinking about the best in others, then you're always going to assume that a phenomena is here for your higher good. If you're a realist and you just realize that, I saw a guy at a Ren fair that had a shirt on that said, "Is it half full or half empty?" He said, "It's just a full glass because it's, water and then air." I love the shirt. It's a fantastic shirt.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's, you can either, there's a spectrum to look at things. And so I think that those who look at the phenomena as being something that needs to be understood, but they're willing to accept and view all potential answers, let's say, for what the phenomena is, and not come down and settle on one specific solution. You mentioned Dr. Paul Masters earlier. First, Michael Paul Masters. He was at Phoenix MUFON a few months back and had an opportunity to talk to him. And his time traveler theory, yeah, it holds water. But the difference is that anything that doesn't support that narrative, he dismisses.
I
And
don't
so
dismiss it. I
that's
don't
a
dismiss
danger
anything.
when you take, science is supposed to be about test, measure the results, and if it's
Mhm.
not what you expected, test again. If it's still not what you expected, modify the experiment.
Can I ask you a question? Another question here, because
Sure, you can ask me
this
all
is
the
really
questions
this.
you want.
First of all, again, I'm a I love the in my opinion, I believe that these conversations help enlighten whatever we're talking about, especially when it comes to this topic. I think we all have a piece of the puzzle we're trying to figure it out, and eventually we'll get there, or we won't, who knows? But I think we can only get there together.
Yep.
So, do you, if you were to take, for example, there's an abduction experience that a woman had where she has two children. One of them was a girl, I believe the other one was a boy, and they were very young. It's under 5 years old. And she said that she used to have these experiences with aliens. By the way, Geraldine has experiences that are sexual in nature with aliens. She believes that she's a part of a hybridization program, and that she is, and I believe she's having experiences. I don't think they're not real or anything. She's having some kind of experience, but in her perspective, they are a part of this spiritual breeding program that she. I hope I'm not misinterpreting, that she's doing with them. There was another person who has had a very similar experience. She's a part of a very sexual experience with these phenomena. She said it's some of the best intimacy she's ever experienced in her life. She's old enough to she has two children. She knows what experiences are like, intimate experiences are like. However, one day she saw her daughter playing with these dolls, and she was doing the exact type of things that she was experiencing, the mother was experiencing in her encounters with these beings.
Mm.
They were doing it to her daughter too.
Mm.
Now, to us, that's terrible. Why would anyone want their children? And by the way, a very common and overwhelming reality of the abduction phenomena is sexual. They are interbreeding with us, period. They are. I mean, if they're doing anything, many people are saying they're doing this stuff. Okay.
Right.
It's just too overwhelming to be true.
David Huggins, another good character in that space.
Well,
It's had
again,
sexual encounter for many years, draws and paints his alien lover. So yes, I fully understand.
and I think they were beautiful. Like the experience was quite beautiful, I think. So, for the most part. So, and we can go all day with. There's a lot of Richard Dolan's book. There's a book that Richard Dolan wrote about what the phenomenon might be, what its agenda was, called Alien Agendas: A Speculative Analysis on the I can't remember the last couple words, but it's about what are they? What might they be?
Mm-hmm.
And in there he talks about something similar, sexual experiences in there that are quite odd. None of them are initiated by the person. They're every single one of them, especially initially, are initiated by the phenomena. They're forcefully having these intimate encounters with people, including children. It doesn't matter. I don't particularly care if there are space brothers. I don't think I want any brother touching my daughters. And so to me, when I think about what the phenomena represents, I don't particularly care whether or not they may be, because I don't believe benevolence is what we just described, first of all. Secondly, I don't think it's benign. Benign isn't what we described. They are actively involved in an inappropriate and unwelcome way with humanity, in a very large portion of us. And it isn't until after people have had these experiences, maybe once or twice, after the terror has subsided, that they ultimately become very loving and attached to their abduction experience. They love it now, when initially it was terrifying. And most of them describe, this is their own words, not me. I kind of rejected this transition here, that they needed to make sense of it. And the only way they could make sense of what happened to them, because they're not giving answers. These beings are not telling people anything really but a couple of vague statements here and there. We love you. We're from Zeta Reticuli. We're from Pleiades. We're from Mars. We're from Venus. We're from wherever that guy said he was from the Mothman prophecy. We're from this planet, that planet. They're not telling us anything specific with any real details, but they're all transitioning us from total fear and terror, and, if you will, abuse, to loving them. That's called Stockholm Syndrome. And it doesn't matter why. What matters is we shouldn't want this to be something that happens to us. And if they are benevolent, we need to have a communication like, hey guys, listen, I think you've been here long enough to know we don't like this stuff. And yes, you can make us like it, but so can an abuser. And if and again, it doesn't matter about our perceptions of right or wrong or morality, or I don't want that happening to me or my children, and I don't think anybody wants that happen. I would love to see someone step up and say, "Man, I welcome them into my children's life." After knowing what they do, I can't imagine them saying that.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good response other than, like you said, it's, the morality of it. They are human.
Subjective, yeah,
Human morals
Mhm.
may not apply outside of the human race.
100%.
But I don't expect to. I don't say that I know their actions or why they make their actions. I could probably respond with some sort of rebuttal that would, lessen the impact of the experience, but that's not, I don't think, what's intended to be. So I won't even attempt to do so. I'll just say that for that particular case, and there are probably others where harm comes to the abductee, I don't have an answer other than to say, you're right. They may not all be benevolent, just like they may not all be I can't never say.
Malevolent.
There you go.
I get. Trust
I
me, I'm
always
like
want to
that
say
too.
Manila envelope, but I know
Manila.
that's
It's going to be
but
based on your experience, right? If your
yeah.
experience was not friendly, like when you said, are you an optimist, a realist, or a pessimist? I don't really believe there's such a thing as a realist, because it's really just your subjective bias based on the fundamental question. I think it was Einstein or somebody that said the most important thing that goes on in your brain every single day is the decision that you live in a hostile or friendly world. Everything after that comes out of that narrative.
Mhm.
So essentially, you assign value to one set of probabilities being more likely than another.
Mm,
My mom is horrible for
that's true.
watching
Yeah.
the news and thinking
Mm.
the sky is falling. And I finally got so fed up with this was about a month ago. I said, Ma, when have you ever been a victim of violence? Has anybody ever hurt you, hit you, beat you up? No. Anybody ever broke into your car, smashed your house, vandalized, hate mail, anything whatsoever? Have you ever had even one experience? No. But you've assigned the probability that the world is a horrible place. If I go outside, something's going to happen. That is your bias. So you're wearing the purple glasses. Everything you're going to see is going to have that shade. So, Stephen Greer might say he's a realist, but he's a realist based on his opinion of
Mhm.
what he thinks is more likely than not. Somebody else with a totally different set of experiences, when they say, well, I'm a realist because I think this is real, it's still opinion based. It's still biased. The only thing I believe we fundamentally can choose is this a happy place or is this not a happy place? And everything flows out of that.
Yeah, I gotta say that was first of all, Louis should be a motivational speaker. Secondly, I think I have to adjust my previous statement. I guess to your question earlier, I probably would be a pessimist because I'm not optimistic about any of this, or anything for that matter. To be honest, I'm happy about my life. I'm very blessed and very pleased with how things are. I feel great. I feel lucky to have what I have and where I am today. Even with the struggles, we talk about this all the time privately, Louis. I'm struggling with a lot of different things, but that's not even what in terms of my happiness level, that's not what I focus on. It's when I look outside, you said about your mom, and this is really important because I do that, Louis. I do this thing where I say, look at what's happening in Gaza, in Africa, in the Congo. Look at what has happened in our country. Look at what's happening now. Look at COVID. There are things constantly, again, either trying to harm or kill us, including each other. And we are somehow, for some reason, incapable of unifying in a way that at least minimizes these dangers in life so that we don't have to feel, these types of stressors. I don't remember the percentage, but quite a large percentage of the population in the US alone has some kind of stress-related illness. As a matter of fact, the leading cause of death is stress-related illnesses, hypertension, high blood pressure, heart disease. These things are literally they're caused by they're stress-related diseases, among many other things, by the way. And that's not because everyone just has a negative perspective. I am very much under the persuasion that nurture is not just creating your perspective, but also being subjected to the amount of stimulation that we are is creating the way that you feel and think about the world. It's not your fault. I don't believe it's your fault. I don't believe that a person who's depressed and sad and dealing with suicidal thoughts, it's not their fault that they're just focusing on the negative. They're being bombarded by it, and maybe there's something chemically or biologically that's just not, they're not, the resilience isn't there, or maybe the threshold for what they can handle isn't there. Or even worse, they're being bombarded by the chemicals they put in their body just from drinking the water or eating the food that we eat, because they may not be wealthy enough to get clean and healthy foods and have clean and healthy water and be in a clean and healthy environment. There are so many things that for the majority of humanity are affecting us at any given time, and it's not good. So when I said realist, I'm looking at the data, and it is overwhelmingly negative. But to your point, I don't have to look at that and say the world is a terrible place. I could focus on the things that I cherish and that are good and that are pleasant. I don't know if that's fair to everyone that's suffering, because sometimes I feel like it's my responsibility to at least say when it's necessary. When you can say something, don't say, "Hey, my life's awesome, I love it." Say, "Hey, look, we need to focus on how to help this issue here and that issue there, and these people are suffering, and they're just like us." And that's what I focus on. That's what I believe is my duty as a human being to do.
So I was just going to ask if, when you look at the data, do you look at it to see if it supports the negative viewpoint, or do you look at it to see if it supports anything?
I don't know. I mean,
I think we do that subconsciously.
Yeah.
We don't even realize, but we definitely do that for sure. Because I mean, social media is not showing all the videos of little kids with lemonade stands donating to cancer, right? They're not showing little boys raising money for the Terry Fox run in the summertime.
Just like I said earlier, media is an advertising agency. They're going to show what sells and what calls people to tune in. And unfortunately, that's negativity. How many people have said, it's like a train wreck. You can't look away. And why do we look at a train wreck? I mean, it's a horrible disaster, but we can't. I mean, unfortunately, we are bombarded with negativity every day, through and through. I do not watch the news. I have the News Nation app installed on my phone only because they're the only much only news station that's carrying UFO related stuff. But that's the only thing I get notifications about. Everything else is turned off. Because we are constantly, now I'm not saying that there isn't negativity in the world and we don't need to acknowledge that and take action on it. We do. But, excuse me, I think sometimes we get so bogged down in the constant day after day of negative stories that we're like, what difference can I make? Or we say the alien space brothers are going to come and save us from all these things that we've done to ourselves. I'll just let them do that, which, by the way, I don't ascribe to either. There are problems. We made them, and we have to fix them.
My thing is, and this is actually a very important to every topic that you can encounter. This is a very, both of you are making me really contemplate my own perspective at this point. I can't say I believe in my mind, and this is why it's important for people to ask these questions like you guys are doing, and to point out certain aspects that I'm not thinking about, by the way, to your point, Louis. I don't know if what I'm doing is confirmation bias. Like, am I just reinforcing my predisposition about the world and this phenomena? I think in a sense, yes, right? Because we all have a perspective before we engage something. But my perspective, my predisposition has been shaped by what I believe is the data itself. A lot of times I look at data and then I ask myself, what has been said about this data? And I look at both perspectives of data. And then I look at the data itself again, and I ask myself, which one of these aligns with the data? Like, kind of like matching up, if you will, a star chart. And you're trying to see if the constellations align over the star chart. Well, a lot of times, what happens is that there is a when it comes to data itself, the data tends to paint a picture, tell a story about something. I believe this 100%. I think this is pretty much objectively true. The question is not how do I see the data? What does the data say about itself? The data says about itself, for example, that a certain percentage of people experience a certain type of experiences. A
Mhm.
certain percentage of people are starving. A certain percentage of people have food insecurity. A certain percentage of the U.S. is experiencing, economic turmoil. There's a lot of poverty all over the world. A certain percentage of, on and on and on and on. And if you think about it, the only people protected from the things that are not good in any way are people in first world countries. And even they experience things that are, again, not that pleasant. Um, so I don't know if by learning about the data, it's that process of learning about the data, is that me searching for confirmation? That's a good question, guys. I don't know. But I do not believe that not looking at it, I think that that's actually quite dangerous because what happens is people, and this, I gotta say, I hate to do this, but when I talk to friends of mine who are, you know, I have a friend, just to be clear, he's an admitted white nationalist, very intelligent guy. He knows his history very well. He just misinterprets it, like sickeningly so, because his perspective is telling him, well, yeah, there was this bad thing that happened in America, but look at where we are now. Look at how the poorest person on your block probably has a big screen TV and an Xbox, right? Which is mostly true. There's a lot of people that have that stuff and they're poor. They're on food stamps and they're cash assistance and things that help the government programs and stuff like that, WIC, and they have a big screen TV and Xbox 360 or an Xbox One or whatever, the newest thing, right? That's not an indication of good. Okay? Most people in America don't even have health insurance or health care. The thing that prevents you from dying, if you're deathly ill, you don't have that thing. So yeah, maybe you have a nice toy, but having a nice toy doesn't save you from dying from the cancer treatment that you need that you can't afford, or the diabetic medicine that you need that you can't afford. And so for me personally, I believe that it is our duty to not just always focus on the dread of the you know the morbid nature of reality, but to recognize that we live in a hostile universe, according to astrophysicists, and everything is trying to literally kill us, and kill all organic matter, if you will. And we need to protect ourselves from the inevitable, not just because it might happen to us, but because it's happening to people like us. And so to me, for me, as not just from a perspective of somebody who, I there's a history ancestrally of people that have experienced things that I hope I never will experience them. But they've experienced it and they've told a story. We can repeat that if we forget. February coming up, by the way, to having thinking about this initially and
Yeah.
ad infinitum with human problems.
No, and I mean, it's a very interesting perspective. And I don't necessarily disagree. There are people who, I grew up in a lower class part of the city that I grew up in. And even then, there were people who the car type donk, I think is what it was. It was like you take an old Cutlass and you put 24-inch rims and everything on it, and they're thousands and thousands of dollars into the car, but yet their house was falling apart because they
Mhm.
didn't want to invest into the house. And so but at the same time, on the same token, um that's their choice.
Hold on one second. This is awesome. So imagine that you're a rich person, right? This is an argument that I've heard a lot of times, and I want a real perspective. I think Louis has a pretty clear perspective. I think that my perspective is skewed by my experience. I will be honest about that. And you seem to be pretty level-headed too. I really like the way that you guys both think versus I don't like the way I think about things. Just so you guys understand, I hate this is terrible,
We
but
got a
it is.
bias and an opinion, and it could be just as flawed in the other
Yeah.
direction as well. You know
It
what I
just
mean?
doesn't feel good to think the way that I do. I think that your perspectives, they would make me feel better if I were to adopt them, but I feel like I can't. I don't think it's so. A rich person has a cushion that a poor person does not.
Mhm.
And you know what I realized? Rich people snort more coke than poor people, yet somehow they're just fine. Rich people have fallen from victory and grace far more than poor people, and yet they're doing just fine. As a matter of fact, if a poor person steals from let's say they go to a cell phone store and they jack an iPhone and they run away. They stole an iPhone. That's bad. Do you know what the number one type of theft in America is? And we can go globally if we want to, if you really think about it. Because there's slavery, there's real slavery in places in African nations where they're mining for resources for nothing. In places like India, where they're working for literally nothing but sometimes just bags of rice. And we can go, it's wage theft. It's not cell phones or petty theft at a local grocery store. Yet most people concern themselves more with, wait a minute, they might steal the phone that I want. Or these people that they just want to have a nice phone or nice rims, whatever. Okay, it's not good. But the number one type of theft comes from a guy, Louis, I love you, in a suit just like my boy Louis Borges.
Difference is I'm not a billionaire.
He's not a billionaire. You get my
But
point.
you're right. You're totally right.
That's the problem here. The problem is that we're looking at each other like, look at how bad this troubled person is. Look at how bad the person who appears to be the epitome of human accomplishment is. We literally make excuses for the rich while we eat the poor because they're they're not what we believe they should be, because I didn't do it. I was poor and I didn't steal. Well, that's great. But there are poor people who want the things that rich people want, but they don't have that cushion. They just don't have the cushion.
Our own society, I think, in how we view success, is significantly at fault for what leads people to do some of the things and to make some of the choices that they make. The fact that we place so much heavy, we place material acquisition, let's say, as the forefront of being a success, as making it. And this may sound rather cliche, but a rich person in life is someone who is surrounded by people who loves them and that they love. But a rich person in society is the person who can go and drop whatever on a Lamborghini and drive it off the lot that day. We have lost the things that truly enrich our lives, because I tell you what, I've got an Xbox and I haven't played it in almost a year because I'd rather spend that time with my family or my friends or sitting out in the desert looking for UFOs. So it's the point in saying all of that is that we, from a very limited perspective, my limited perspective, is that we value too much that really doesn't matter, and we don't value the things that do. And if we, instead of thinking about the next ring that Samsung can develop or whatever that is going to monitor your biometrics as you work out in the gym, if we put that same ingenuity towards solving the water crisis that exists all over the world. I mean, think about it. Star Wars gave us an answer: moisture farming, right? We've got evaporators, we've got solar panels that can power those things. Every place on the planet has humidity, with the exception of the Arctic Circle. There's nobody that lives there anyway. So there are answers to the problem, but we would rather put research and development into new gadgets rather than life-changing initiatives. So I do want to.
Corporations are the ones that are doing that. They're making sure that the money goes into projects that,
because we drive, right? We drive though what they develop.
Absolutely. Who's making the algorithm push the content of the guy in the Lambo versus the kid with the lemonade stand, right?
Yeah, well,
we're looking at this from a 1,000-foot view. You need to look at it from a 25,000-foot view, because nothing is for nothing. And and I would argue, again, not to go too far off topic, but the people that you see that are killing it, fancy cars and house and all that, they are 3 months without a job away from losing all of that. It is on credit, it is finance, it is on loan. It's
most of them live paycheck to paycheck.
Oh yeah,
They even
the
Yeah.
guy
have a
looks like
paycheck.
he's got everything going for him, and yet he beats his wife, and he's a POS to his kid.
Yeah.
But this is who
Right.
we want to idolize in society.
Perception is
Exactly.
everything. So I do want to, because I usually make these about an hour. We're well past an hour recording, so I do want to pull it back around and just say, you know, very interesting viewpoints on. First of all, phenomenal. You guys both are phenomenal guests. I would love to have you back any other time. And if we do a spin-off show where we talk about the problems with the world and how we can fix them, I would love to do that too. Whereas maybe we can actually encourage some other people that have the ability to change the world. But also I would say that the viewpoints, Marquise, that you expressed around abduction, I perhaps my engagement with abductees has been on a limited scope, in that I've not heard a lot of the negative experiences that people have had. And so I thank you for bringing that to my attention. It's something that I had not really ultimately given a lot of consideration before, and I really appreciate it.
If you have 2 hours, I can give you a whole. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. And then lastly, I'll just say, we're going to start wrapping up here. If you guys, of course, I've talked about the Quantum Ladder podcast. Where can people find the Quantum Ladder podcast?
Yeah. So thanks for having us on, Josh. We appreciate your time, and it's always great chatting with different opinions. Like, why do you want to talk to somebody who believes exactly the same thing you do? I want to learn something. I want to be challenged. I want to see.
That's called an echo chamber.
Yeah. What do you think? Why do you think that? Maybe I could learn something from that. So thank you for giving us the opportunity. And for anybody who wants to check out Quantum Ladder Podcast, we're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and the UNX Network. You can also go to quantumladderpodcast.com, and our live episodes come out every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Pacific. We love chatting. As you mentioned earlier, our chat room is pretty interactive and very polite, and it's refreshing. There's a lot of not so good content out there. There's a lot of people just winging it, to be totally honest, just making stuff up, calling it fact. And I think it's important that we shed light on some of the problems in the world and not get too narrow-minded in our scope. You know what I mean? Don't get too much into one topic or another. Everything is happening all at once. The phenomena is part of life, therefore it is affecting our lives. So look at it like anything else. And it's challenging because you talk science with some UFO people, it doesn't go anywhere. You try talking UFOs to the science world, they want to rip your head off. So for people that claim to be so fact-based and going where the science is, they got a real tendency to just throw it away if it doesn't align with what they think. So the purpose of our show is to not have an opinion. We give you the topic. Some people are saying this, some people are saying that. Here's why they think that way, but we want you to go do your own research. Don't take it from us. And don't take it from other shows either. I've heard people watch a show or seen them watch a show, hear something false, and now it's going around like, yeah, I saw a show the other day and they said this, and you're just spreading bad information. And the challenge to the content creators out there, keep it honest, keep it factual, get off the ego train and clickbait, talk about some real stuff. Don't be scared to change your mind, and don't be scared to challenge somebody. Just do it with polite people. If people just want to argue, skeptic I can deal with. A debunker I have no time for, because even if I show you evidence, your mind's made up. I don't have time for that. I want you to say, hey, I want to change my mind. If you have a better way, and if it makes more sense, I want to change my mind, because I don't know what the hell's going on either. So have a humility about yourself and consume content, wade through the tsunami of shows. Some are good sometimes, not good other times. But definitely don't just look at one thing, because I've seen people ruminate on negative things and they get so wrapped up in that it just fully consumes them, and that's not healthy. So have a healthy mix of topics. We do alien shows as well, but we're also going to talk about things like we have in the past, like water and corporations controlling. We may not even have a say in this thing. And
zeitgeist.
We're all getting depressed. Maybe it's heavy metals in our drinking water and we don't even realize that. Your kid's got ADHD. Maybe it's red food coloring. So we're not scared to go where the conspiracy could be, but we're going to present some data that actually backs it up. Not just, I think it's this. No. Here's what others say. We're not PhD scientists. We're just like everybody else. So we can take something complicated and make it digestible for anybody. And that's the whole point of Quantum Ladder Podcast.
That's fantastic. So, Marquise, any parting words?
Yeah, I just want to say to your audience, this is the first conversation that I've had with you, the only, and I think that your audience is in the right place. I like the way that you think about things. We talk to a lot of people, man. There, it is rare to find someone that maybe you have a perspective, but when you discuss things with somebody who you may disagree with, and I namely myself, the way that you present your ideas and objections and alternatives, fantastic. You're an intelligent person. You're very thoughtful, and I personally appreciate that, especially in this field. I think it's important to have something like this. You're in the right place. You guys are in the right place. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I think Louis pretty much killed it with what he said. I'm with you on all of that, but I wanted to say something for you and for the audience. You guys need to keep stick with you and appreciate what you got. Seriously.
Well, I appreciate that. And anybody who's listening, you can stay and listen to me and still listen to the Quantum Ladder podcast, because there's multiple time throughout the week and the month, right? So,
right.
All right. Thank you all so much for tuning in. As a reminder, if you have an experience or if you'd like to come on the show and talk about your experience, I'd love to know about it. You can email me at joshrutledge@mysterialexperiences.com. And otherwise, we'll talk to you next time. Good night, everybody.